The tale of Ngozi Fulani and Lady Susan Hussey perfectly sums up the distortions, hollowness, and madness of contemporary society and media. A non-story, puffed up into a huge event, wreathed in lies, and shouted from the rooftops, while the truth and real stories are ignored and buried. And the reason for this episode? More grist to the mill. Another chance to push the narrative that gives meaning to the lives of the fools who advance it. And to maintain their truth, reality must be warped, magnified, distorted, and obscured. The news, the BBC, wider society, and mainstream media in general is now like a hall of mirrors. A crazed fantasia with only a passing resemblance to objective reality. And the likes of the BBC have all the rationality and integrity of North Korean state television. It really has got that bad. And all this mendacious furore because one person asked another where she's from. Now, first up, asking where people are from isn't racist. My name is Finbar, so I get asked where I'm from every day. And when I am, I just answer, Ireland. Because why would I be rude or awkward about it? People only ask because they're interested. They like to learn. And that's a good thing. Regarding that as offensive is deep idiocy. Regarding it as assault is simply madness. And it gets even crazier if you consider the circumstances. Ngozi Fulani was born Marlene Headley in London, but she changed her name and dressed like a character from the Flintstones to try and distance herself from her British roots and to appear as African as possible. So why would she act offended if someone assumes she's not British? She clearly has little interest in Britain and wants to distance herself from it as much as possible. You'd think she'd be delighted for the opportunity to brag about her African roots. But of course, that sort of preening can take a back seat when the opportunity to play the victim card comes into play. Because it seems that Fulani made a concerted effort to set this up, to goad a royal into making the sort of innocent inquiry that she can twist into horrific, racist abuse, and to raise her profile. But Fulani isn't the victim here. She went looking for prey. And now poor Lady Hussey has had her reputation tarnished. Her life turned upside down. Her career finished. It's Hussey who's the victim here. And Fulani, who clearly went out of her way to destroy her life. She shouldn't be fawned over. She should be pilloried. But of course, the BBC fell right into her trap, interpreting this innocuous non-event as a case of horrific racism and running with it as their lead story for 3 days straight. At a time of revolution in China, war in Ukraine, and turmoil across the globe. The BBC elbowed all those stories aside to push distorted lies on a non-event, just because it shores up their preferred narrative. It's a shocking dereliction of duty. And it coincided with the revelation that white British people now constitute a minority in London, Birmingham, Leicester, Luton, Slough, and a number of other cities. In fact, they didn't just play this down. They actually lied about it. The BBC also failed to mention the recent race riots in Leicester when speaking to a local who bizarrely claimed it was a utopia of multicultural harmony. And one wonders how many people they had to speak to before they found one with the right opinions. This is hardly new either. In 2015, Roger Mosey, an ex-editorial director at the BBC, went public with how they massaged evidence to push their preferred narrative on immigration. A BBC reporter had interviewed close to 60 people who were alarmed about the rising number of migrants in their area. Only one person was happy. So they buried all the negative reports and aired the only supportive opinion, suggesting that 1.5% of respondents reflected the prevailing view, while completely ignoring the other 98.5%. It's the sort of brazen lying that would shame a Soviet commissar. But it doesn't shame the BBC, who still refuse to accept any claims of bias, any suggestion that they're any less than the epitome of journalistic probity, integrity, and impartiality. And what of their champion on this occasion? Well, Ngozi Fulani is an activist, an extremist, in fact. An avowed supporter of Black Lives Matter, she runs a charity called Sister Space, one that reserves its charity for black women, which sounds a bit racist, frankly. Fulani has an axe to grind. Just like the BBC, she has an agenda to push. And surprise, surprise, it's the same agenda. Also, despite running a charity, she's purported to be worth around £1 million, which is curious, though not as curious as the twisted priorities of the BBC, which have been exposed again in their coverage of Twitter. That site, preferred by BBC journalists, has long been a hive of scum and villainy, drenched in death threats, support for the vilest of groups, and abuse thousands of times worse than that directed at Fulani. Yet this never excited the interest of the BBC, not even the outpouring of abuse directed at the Queen when she died. Yet when Elon Musk took over, suddenly the BBC couldn't get enough of reporting how awful Twitter was. It gave wall-to-wall coverage, right up until the moment Musk revealed that Twitter had colluded with the Democratic Party and the FBI to lie to the population, to bury the truth, and to sway the result of an American election. That's one of the biggest stories in years. But you won't find a single mention of that on the BBC. They magnify innocuous events into horrors, while they utterly ignore many of the most alarming stories around. They live in an Alice in Wonderland fantasy world, where down is up and dark is light. It's truly bizarre. And their distorted mania was laid bare in the extraordinary rant delivered by Jeremy Vine on Love Actually. This film, made in 2003, is hugely popular. But Vine practically foamed at the mouth about the lack of black and gay people in the film. Like ticking the BBC's preferred boxes should be the first priority in any creative endeavour. This sort of deranged lunacy is par for the course. The BBC present a version of the world they want to believe in. They'll amp up stories that fit their narrative and bury any that they find inconvenient. They hide the truth. They push lies. They pump out propaganda. And the world they present is nonsense, a derangement, a warped fantasy. They are not fit for purpose. Yet they're the compulsory propaganda of the nation, and refusal to pay for their lies can result in a prison term. This is a nightmare beyond the imagination of George Orwell, yet we all live it every single day. If you want to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and think about buying my books. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they go into topics like this in much greater detail. They're available on the links below. Please do feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.